The wind howled fiercely through the quiet mountain town, rushing like a restless spirit between towering pine trees and slamming relentlessly against frosted rooftops. Snow had been falling steadily since late morning, weaving a thick white blanket that muffled every sound, cloaking the world in a profound, almost eerie silence. Inside a small wooden cabin nestled near the edge of the dense forest, Sarah Thompson, a 28-year-old single mother, glanced anxiously at the old clock on the wall. Her hands moved steadily as she stirred a pot of simmering soup on the stove, but her eyes kept drifting back to the window. Outside, a small figure bundled in purple played just a few steps from the porch. It was Lily, her 3-year-old daughter. Wrapped tightly in layers against the cold, Lily never wandered far. She was a quiet, gentle child, clinging to the familiar. In one mittened hand, she gripped her faded teddy bear Mr. Buttons, dragging him softly behind her as she waddled through the thick snowdrifts. Her small boots barely made a sound on the powdery surface. Sarah smiled softly, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the snow paint everything in calm, the trees, the rooftops, even the old swing set near the tree line, all dipped in silence and white. Normally, Sarah never let Lily stay out long in the cold, but today had been slow and quiet. Lost in household chores and grading a stack of preschool art projects, she'd lost track of time. Behind her, the kettle hissed softly, steam curling like a ghost. She wiped her hands on a towel and glanced again through the fogged-up window. But Lily's giggles, once bright and clear, had suddenly faded. Sarah leaned closer, brow furrowing. The yard that had just echoed with her daughter's laughter was now empty. Silent. Her heart skipped a frantic beat. She pressed her palm against the cold window pane, scanning the snow-covered yard again, hoping to glimpse that small bundle of purple. But there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Tossing the towel aside, she rushed to the front door and flung it open with such force the wind nearly ripped it from her grasp. "Lily!" she called, voice sharp, rising with panic. "Lily, sweetheart, come inside now." The wind swallowed her words whole, howling past her ears like a wild beast. It whipped her hair into her face as she stepped onto the porch. Now the snow fell heavier, thick sheets drifting sideways in angry bursts. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped into the deepening snow, boots crunching in the icy blanket. "Lily!" she shouted again, louder this time. Still nothing. Then she saw them small footprints, barely visible, trailing away from the porch, weaving unsteadily toward the edge of the trees. Her stomach turned cold. How long had she been gone? 5 minutes? 10 more? She couldn't remember. Without hesitation, she took off running, calling out her daughter's name over and over, her voice breaking with terror. But the forest ahead already blurred, snow swirling thick and fast between the bare trees, erasing the path, erasing everything. All that remained was emptiness, the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful anymore. The kind of silence that screamed. Lily didn't know where she was. Snow came up past her knees with every clumsy step. Her cheeks were flushed bright red from the sting of the cold wind. Her nose ran freely down her lip, but she didn't wipe it away. Her mittened hands clutched Mr. Buttons tightly to her chest. The once soft bear now damp and cold with snow. She hadn't meant to wander. She'd only wanted to follow the butterfly. Bright blue butterfly, impossible to see in the snow, but real to her, flitting silently through the frosty air. It danced just beyond her reach, its delicate wings glowing like tiny shards of magic. When it floated toward the trees, she followed, laughing softly to herself, and then the house was gone. The trees surrounded her, now tall, still, groaning under winter's heavy weight. Her legs burned. Her face stung. Her lips trembled as she whispered a small, frightened "Mommy." But there was no answer. The wind howled louder, tugging at her coat and hood, making her stumble. She turned in slow, scared circles, tears streaming as she murmured into Mr. Button's worn ear. She didn't understand why the world suddenly felt so huge, why the cold bit so deep, why the trees looked different, strange and shadowed. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, a rock or branch, and she fell forward, her small body crumpling into the cold white. She tried to get up, but the cold wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, her limbs refusing to move. Her fingers barely held onto Mr. Button's. So she stopped trying. She curled into herself, knees drawn tight. Her tiny frame shook as tears slid down frozen cheeks, crystallizing on her lashes. All around her was white, endless, silent, cold white. Deep in the forest, beneath the falling snow, something stirred. A large German shepherd moved silently through the trees. His breath rose in soft puffs, curling into the icy air. His thick fur was tangled and dusted with frost. His frame was lean from months of living alone. His name was Max. He had no collar, no home, no one to call his own. But he remembered people, their scent, the warmth of fire, the sound of laughter. And tonight, something in the wind tugged at those memories. Then he heard it, a faint, high-pitched sound carried on the storm. Not a bird, not an animal, a child's cry, weak, frightened, close. Max froze. His ears perked. His nose lifted into the bitter wind. He waited. There it was again, a soft sob, muffled by snow. Without hesitation, Max moved forward, pushing through a wall of drifting white. His paws crushed the frozen earth, instincts guiding him toward the sound. Moments later, through the trees, he saw her, a tiny shape curled on the ground. A child, no more than a toddler, bundled in purple. She held a stuffed bear tight to her chest. Motionless. Pale. Max approached slowly, sniffing the snow around her. He nudged her gently with his cold nose. No response. He circled once, then lay down beside her, curling his large body protectively around hers. The warmth of him spread slowly, shielding her from the biting cold. He didn't understand why he stayed. She was a stranger, a small, helpless thing that meant nothing to his survival. But something deep inside him, older than memory, older than fear, told him she needed protection. She was meant to be kept safe. She stirred faintly, eyelids fluttering. "Puppy," she whispered, fingers brushing through his thick fur before going still again. Max didn't move. He stayed there, a silent, loyal guardian in the snow. Listening. Protecting. Waiting. The storm raged on, snow pouring in thick, furious gusts, blurring the trees, burying every trace beneath a white, unforgiving silence. Max curled tightly around Lily, his massive frame pressed close to her small one, doing everything he could to keep her warm. The cold bit into his skin. His legs ached. His breath came heavy and slow. But he didn't move. Every so often, he lifted his head, barking short, deep sounds that vanished into the roaring wind. He didn't know if anyone could hear him. He didn't care. He had to try. Lily stirred slightly, letting out a tiny, barely audible whimper. Her mittened hand reached out, brushing his fur, but didn't hold on. Max felt how faint she had become, how shallow her breath was. He shifted, pressing closer, wrapping himself tighter around her. Snow piled higher, creeping up his back, crusting around his eyes. Still, he didn't sleep. He watched the swaying trees. He listened for voices that never came, and all the while, he stayed, because something in him refused to leave. The night stretched endlessly, heavy with ice and silence, but as long as Lily breathed, even faintly, Max would not let the cold take her. Not tonight. Not while he was still there. When the storm finally broke, it left behind a frozen, silent world. The wind had died, but the cold remained thick, sharp, merciless. Trees bent under heavy snow. Roofs vanished beneath white. Sarah's voice was hoarse, nearly gone from hours of shouting her daughter's name. Her legs ached. Her fingers burned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. A small team had joined the search just before dawn. Neighbors, rescue workers, strangers who'd heard the news. They moved carefully through the forest, scanning every snowbank, every hollow between trees. Then a voice shouted through the stillness, "I see something over here." Sarah's heart lurched violently. Without thinking, she ran toward the voice, snow grabbing at her boots, branches clawing at her coat. When she broke through the trees, she stopped. There, half buried beneath a drift of snow, was a large German shepherd curled tightly around something smaller. The dog didn't move. His fur was stiff with frost, his body frozen, not with fear, but with purpose. In the center of his embrace was Lily. Sarah dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she brushed snow from her daughter's face. Lily's skin was cold. Her lips tinged blue. Her lashes were frozen with tiny crystals, but her chest rose slow and shallow. She was alive. Relief crashed over Sarah, overwhelming and instant, but with it came guilt, heavy and sharp, clawing at her throat. She held her daughter close, heart breaking under the weight of what she'd seen. Lily so small, so fragile, alone in the cold for so long. How many times had she called out? How long had she waited before falling silent? Sarah pressed her forehead against Lily's, tears slipping down frozen cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have never let you out of my sight." And then slowly she looked up at the dog who had stayed. His eyes met hers, tired, steady. Unwavering, she reached out, gently resting her hand in his frozen fur. "Thank you," she breathed. "You didn't give up on her, and Max stayed when the ambulance." Doors burst open. Chows followed, 3-year-old Femaloon unconscious. Severe hypothermia. Someone shouted. Nurse rushed forward with blankets, monitors, and sharp, urgent voices. The heat of the hospital hit like a wave, but Lily remained motionless in Sarah's arms, limp, ice-cold lips tinged blue. They took her gently, but swiftly. A nurse began cutting away the soaked clothing, revealing purple fingertips and skin pale as snow. Someone carefully removed Mr. Buttons from her grasp, the bear stiff with frost, get heated. Blankets and hair, no oxygen on her, temperatures dangly low, start warm. 4. Sarah stood just outside the trauma room, arm changing uselessly at her sides. Unable to breathe, she watched through the glass nibble to hear the words, but reading everything in their faces, tension, urgency, uncertainty. Minutes crawled by like hours. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Was this how it would end? She was so small, so still. Sarah's knees weakened. Someone placed a care behind her, murmured something shackled in process, and then through the hum of chaos a sound rose, soft, steady, mechanical. It was the monitor beeping slow, rhythmically, a fragile signal that Lily was still breathing, still hair, still fighting. Sarah gripped the edge off chair, tears falling freely now, not from panic, but from a desperate hope beginning to stir inside her. Not safe yet, but not lost, not yet. Now, hours later, the room was quiet, almost too quiet. Lily lay beneath a heavy white blanket, her skin still pale, but her breathing slow and steady. She hadn't opened her eyes, not yet. Sarah sat beside the bed, holding her hand as if touch alone could anchor her daughter to this world. Her gaze drifted downward. Max was still there, curled tightly at the foot of the bedis. Eyes half closed, his body unmoving except for the occasional twitch of an ear. He wasn't supposed to be there, but no one could bring themselves to send him away. Sarah stared at him, no collar, no tags, no obligation, and yet he had stayed. She leaned back in the chair, exhausted but unable to close her eyes. Every time she did, she saw Lily in the snow, cold and slipping away, until Max appeared, a silent shadow. Her guardian. Sarah reached down, her fingers brushing through his thick, furry. "Don't know why you chose her," she whispered, "but you did." Max didn't move, but he didn't leave either. And somehow that was enough. The first time Lily opened her eyes, it was only for a moment, just long enough to see the dog. Sarah had been half asleep in the chair, her hands still wrapped around her daughter. She felt the small fingers twitch, and when she looked up, Lily's eyes were barely open, glassy, unfocused, but there her heart stopped. She leaned in, barely daring to breathe, afraid the moment might vanish if she moved too quickly. Then her lips moved a whisper, dry and wake, "Puppy." Sarah let out a breath. She hadn't realized she was holding Yes Weatherd. She whispered back, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead, "Here, he stayed with you." Lily's gaze shifted, slow and deliberate, toward the end of the bed. Max lifted his head, hadn't moved closer, didn't make a sound, but his ears perked and his eyes locked on hers, not like a dog waiting for command, but like something older. Morena Windley blinked slowly. Then she smiled. It was faint, fleeting, but to Sarah it was writhing. Her little girl was still in her, still fighting. Lily's small fingers loosened slightly, no longer clinging so tightly to the blanket. Her eyelids dropped again, her body sinking back into sleep, but that smile lingered even as her face relaxed. Max rested his head back on his paws. His job for now was still not done. Sarah leaned back in the chair, watching the two of them. Her daughter barely pulled back from Thiege, and the dog, who never left her seated there, was no dramatic realization, nominal decision, but in that moment, Sarah understood something clearly. This dog, this wild, nameless shadow from the woods, wasn't just passing through. He belonged here now. With them weeks past, the snow outside the cabin began to melt, slowly revealing patches of frozen earth and crushed pine needles. Winter was loosening its grip, not just in the land, but on Sarah's heart. Tuli recovered slowly, her strength returned in pieces. First a word, then a law, then a few careful steps across the floor, with her stuffed bear trailing behind her through it all. Max was there, followed her from room to room, always close but never too close, giving her space but never letting her out of his sight. If she stumbled, he rose. If she cried out in sleep, he lifted his head from the floor. To Lily, his presence was a given, quiet, constant, unquestioned. To Sarah, it still felt like a miracle. He had never asked for anything, not food, not shelter, not attention, and yet, the first time Sarah set a bowl down in the kitchen, he looked at it, then at her, as if unsure whether he was allowed to stay. "You're not going anywhere," she had whispered almost to herself, and hadn't now. On quiet mornings, Sarah sat in the porch with a mug of coffee in hand, watching Lily play just beyond the steps. Max was always beside her, standing alert, but at peace. There had been a time when Sarah thought they were just two, a mother and her child, doing their best to hold on, but now there were three. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were, and finally they were